Picture this. You walk into your living room. Sunlight pours through the windows. On the center table, a vase overflows with vibrant, beautiful flowers. To the casual eye, it's perfect, a scene from a dream. But what if I told you that some of those very flowers, while stunning to look at, might actually be quietly pulling your life in the wrong direction? Not all beauty brings blessings. Some beauty masks stagnant energy, hidden misfortune, or even blockages that can quietly erode your wealth, your health, and your emotional harmony without you ever noticing. You see, in Feng Shui, the ancient art of creating environments that support success, happiness, and abundance, what you bring into your home isn't just about aesthetics, it's about energy. Everything you place, especially living things like plants and flowers, carries a vibration. That vibration either nourishes your home's qi, fueling your fortune and vitality, or slowly saps it away, introducing unseen obstacles between you and the life you're trying to build. And yes, that includes flowers, especially flowers. Today we're going to uncover something most people don't realize. There are 7 specific flowers that Feng Shui masters around the world strongly advise you to keep outside your home or not keep at all. These flowers, despite their outward charm, carry energies of separation, loss, emotional stagnation, and even financial misfortune. Some are tied to ancient symbols of grief and endings. Some subtly weaken the energy field of your home, making it harder for opportunity and joy to take root. And the craziest part? Most people have no idea. They think they're simply decorating while silently sabotaging their own prosperity. But don't worry, this isn't about fear. This isn't about superstition, and it definitely isn't about turning your home into a museum of strict rules. It's about understanding energy, about seeing beyond appearances, about using practical, timeless wisdom to create spaces that actually work for you, not against you. In today's journey, I'll walk you through each of these 7 flowers. What makes them problematic? The subtle ways they may already be influencing your space without you knowing, and most importantly, what you can do instead. I'll also show you beautiful, powerful alternatives you can bring into your home to energize your wealth, protect your health, and invite harmony back into every room. And let me tell you, once you see your home through this energetic lens, you will never look at flowers or any object you bring into your space the same way again. Before we dive deeper, if you believe, like I do, that practical wisdom rooted in real results is worth sharing, I'd love your help. Please take just a moment right now to like this video, share it with someone you care about, and subscribe to New Day Mindfulness. It's a small action for you, but it makes a massive difference for me in this community. I'm working hard to reach 1,000 subscribers so I can continue creating high-quality, deeply practical Feng Shui content that helps more people align their homes, their energy, and their destinies. Your support truly fuels this mission. All right, ready to discover which flowers might be quietly draining your fortune and which ones can help you bloom into your most prosperous self? Let's get started. The 7 flowers to avoid indoors. 1. Hydrangeas. Hydrangeas, with their large, clustered blooms and soft pastel colors, are often admired for their aesthetic appeal and their ability to add instant charm to gardens and floral arrangements. However, from a Feng Shui perspective, their energy signature is far more complex and in many cases problematic when placed indoors. While they may appear lush and vibrant at first glance, hydrangeas symbolically carry undercurrents of emotional distance, coldness, and disconnection, qualities that can subtly but powerfully influence the emotional fabric of a home. In traditional Feng Shui, flowers are not evaluated solely by their outward beauty, but by the energy, or qi, they radiate into a space. Hydrangeas, because of their heavy, dense floral heads and their tendency to wilt rather dramatically when their environment is not perfectly maintained, are considered unstable in their energetic output. They symbolize emotions that are bottled up, unexpressed, or disconnected from authentic communication. In a household, this subtle energetic frequency can manifest as strained relationships, misunderstandings, emotional withdrawal, and even a general feeling of coldness among family members who would otherwise thrive on warmth and connection. The impact of hydrangeas is often not immediate but cumulative. When placed in key areas such as the living room, dining room, or family wealth sectors, they create an energetic atmosphere that subtly discourages open communication and emotional bonding. Over time, family members may find themselves growing distant from one another without fully understanding why. Conversations become more superficial. Small conflicts escalate unnecessarily. Emotional intimacy, which is critical for harmonious living and cooperative energy flow, becomes harder to access. Even in professional contexts, such as home offices or workspaces within the home, hydrangeas can dampen collaborative energy, leading to missed opportunities in frayed partnerships. Consider the story of a young professional woman named Sarah, who unknowingly experienced the subtle draining effects of hydrangeas in her own home. Sarah was a rising marketing executive living in a stylish apartment she had decorated meticulously to reflect her taste and ambition. In her living room, she proudly displayed a large arrangement of hydrangeas in a prominent central location, believing it added a touch of sophistication and calm. However, over the course of a year, she noticed increasing tension in her personal life. Discussions with her parents and siblings, once warm and supportive, became short and transactional. Visits home, which used to be filled with laughter and relaxed conversation, grew awkward and strained. At work, team projects that had once been easy and rewarding became fraught with miscommunications and missed deadlines. Opportunities she was once naturally attracting seemed to dry up without clear reason. Feeling frustrated but intuitively sensing that something about her environment was off, Sarah consulted a Feng Shui advisor. Upon entering her apartment, the advisor immediately pointed out the hydrangea display as a potential energetic block. Guided by this insight, Sarah decided to replace the hydrangeas with a vibrant arrangement of sunflowers, known in Feng Shui for their properties of promoting optimism, clarity, and open-hearted energy. Within a month, Sarah noticed a dramatic shift. Her family interactions warmed again, with deeper, more meaningful conversations returning effortlessly. At work, collaboration improved, and she was offered an unexpected opportunity to lead a major project, an advancement that had seemed elusive just weeks before. Sarah's experience is a vivid testament to how even seemingly minor environmental choices can have profound, cumulative impacts on one's emotional well-being and financial trajectory. Analyzing this transformation more deeply, it becomes clear why the switch from hydrangeas to sunflowers produced such a powerful energetic reversal. Hydrangeas, with their dense, somewhat drooping blooms, reinforce inward collapse, self-containment, and energetic withdrawal. Sunflowers, by contrast, reach upward toward the light with strength and clarity, symbolizing openness, confidence, and active engagement with life. In replacing one with the other, Sarah was not just changing the visual aesthetic of her space. She was recalibrating the underlying chi field, shifting from contraction to expansion, from suppression to expression, from emotional fog to emotional radiance. In practical Feng Shui, such shifts are not viewed as mystical, but as natural energetic cause and effect. The environment continuously interacts with the inhabitants' thoughts, emotions, and life experiences, reinforcing patterns over time. By adjusting the environmental inputs, the visual cues, the energetic resonances, residents can gently but powerfully influence the outcomes they experience across all dimensions of life: relationships, career, health, wealth, and personal fulfillment. Therefore, if you are currently using hydrangeas as part of your home decor, especially in wealth sectors, family gathering spaces, or personal energy areas, it may be worth reconsidering their placement. If you absolutely love their visual appeal and feel emotionally nourished by them despite Feng Shui cautions, consider limiting them to outdoor gardens, balconies, or areas where their impact is buffered by natural airflow and sunlight. Outdoors, their heavy yin energy disperses more easily, preventing the stagnation and emotional contraction they can cause when confined within closed indoor spaces. For indoor purposes, better alternatives include not only sunflowers but also peonies, chrysanthemums, and tulips, all of which carry more dynamic, life-affirming, wealth-enhancing chi signatures. These flowers actively encourage emotional openness, gratitude, optimism, and relational harmony. qualities that are foundational for sustaining both personal happiness and financial prosperity in the long term. In conclusion, while hydrangeas are undeniably beautiful, their energetic footprint in the context of Feng Shui makes them a risky choice for those serious about cultivating environments that promote wealth, connection, and vitality. Their beauty masks an undercurrent of emotional coolness and disconnection that, over time, can subtly undermine the very qualities most necessary for thriving. By understanding and respecting the unseen forces that flowers introduce into our spaces, we can make wiser, more empowering choices. Choices that not only delight the eyes, but nourish the soul and fortify the future. 2. Purple orchids. Purple orchids have long been admired for their breathtaking beauty, exotic structure, and delicate allure. Their vivid color and sophisticated form often make them a popular choice for home decoration, particularly among those seeking to introduce a sense of refinement and luxury into their spaces. However, in the careful eyes of Feng Shui practitioners, purple orchids carry a complicated and energetic signature that, if misunderstood or misplaced, can create subtle but significant disruptions in the emotional and financial flow of a home. Unlike flowers that project outward joy, connectivity, and wealth attraction, purple orchids primarily stimulate inward, introverted energy. While this introspective force can be beneficial in very specific contexts, it can quickly become problematic when introduced into high-energy, communal, or prosperity-oriented areas of the home. In Feng Shui, every object's shape, color, and form dictates the type of qi it emits. Purple in the energetic color spectrum is a complex blend of red, fire, and blue. Water. It symbolizes wisdom, depth, mystery, and spiritual contemplation. When channeled properly, purple can enhance meditation, creativity, and personal insight. However, when placed without conscious intention, especially in areas meant to foster family interaction, financial dynamism, or career advancement, purple orchids can overstimulate inward reflection to the point of withdrawal, isolation, and stagnation. Instead of supporting open communication, shared energy, and outward success, they encourage retreat, silence, and emotional distance. This effect often manifests gradually and subtly. Households that display purple orchids prominently in living rooms, dining rooms, or wealth sectors may begin to notice a cooling of social warmth. Family gatherings feel a bit more strained. Conversations grow shorter and less animated. Opportunities for networking and collaboration appear to shrink. Financial energy, which thrives on movement, expansion, and relational flow, starts to slow down. Individuals may find themselves feeling increasingly introspective, but without the accompanying sense of clarity or renewal that healthy introspection usually brings. Instead, the introspection becomes heavy, circular, and isolating, sapping motivation and outward momentum. From a personal analysis standpoint, purple orchids are best understood as high-frequency, but narrowly channeled energy conductors. Their refined, almost aloof vibration makes them ideal companions for personal studios, meditation rooms, private libraries, or artistic workspaces, areas where inward reflection, deep focus, and solitary creativity are genuinely needed and supported. In these spaces, the orchid's energy nourishes introspection without harming social dynamics or financial qi. However, when introduced into public, communal, or prosperity-charged areas, they clash with the natural needs of the environment, creating a mismatch that can undermine both personal happiness and material growth. Consider the story of a young architect named Daniel, who unknowingly experienced the energetic consequences of misplacing purple orchids. Daniel, passionate about minimalist design and contemporary aesthetics, decorated his open-concept apartment with sleek lines, neutral palettes, and several striking arrangements of purple orchids positioned strategically across his living and dining spaces. At first, he was thrilled with the visual effect. The orchids gave his home a magazine-worthy polish. Yet over the next year, Daniel began to feel an increasing sense of emotional detachment. Friends who used to visit frequently began to pull away without clear reasons. Group dinners turned awkward. His creative projects, once fueled by lively collaboration, began to stall. Financially, his freelance contracts diminished. He felt increasingly isolated and uninspired, but he could not pinpoint the cause. After consulting a Feng Shui specialist, Daniel learned about the inward, isolating tendencies associated with purple orchids. Following the advice he received, he moved the orchids into a private study he had previously left underutilized. In their place, he introduced arrangements of vibrant sunflowers and fresh peonies into his main living and dining areas, flowers known for their expansive, optimistic chi. The shift was almost immediate. The emotional atmosphere of his home warmed. Invitations for collaborative projects increased. Friends commented on how much more welcoming his space felt. Within 6 months, Daniel had secured 2 major contracts that reignited his professional momentum. The key lesson from Daniel's experience, and from Feng Shui wisdom in general, is that beauty alone is never the measure of suitability in energy design. Energy must match purpose. A flower as elegant as the purple orchid can be either a profound ally or a quiet saboteur, depending entirely on context. In private, contemplative zones, they enhance personal power, deepen self-awareness, and refine creative focus. In public or wealth-generating zones, they unintentionally suppress the very energies, connection, vibrancy, outward flow that prosperity requires. From a practical standpoint, if you love purple orchids and feel emotionally uplifted by them, you can certainly keep them in your home, but with strategic placement. Designate them for spaces intended for solitude, concentration, or spiritual work. A private meditation corner, an artist's studio, a reading nook, or even a secluded garden room are ideal locations. In these environments, the orchid's energy supports the human needs of introspection, healing, and personal evolution without interfering with relational warmth or material expansion. It is also important to pay attention to the health and vibrancy of purple orchids when you do keep them. Orchids are sensitive plants that reflect the energetic care they receive. A neglected orchid, one that is drooping, discolored, or drying, magnifies the isolating, contracting energy patterns already inherent in its nature. Regular care, appreciation, and environmental alignment ensure that the orchid's chi remains high, contributing positively to its intended space rather than detracting from it. Moreover, in Feng Shui, the visual flow created by the orchids matters just as much as their placement. Their slender vertical lines should complement spaces designed for upward growth, personal mastery, or spiritual ascent, not spaces intended for group engagement, celebration, or financial dynamism. When their visual lines point upward with strength and grace in a private space, they reinforce self-elevation. When they dominate a communal space, they send mixed signals that confuse the energy field. In conclusion, purple orchids are exquisite beings of concentrated energy and profound symbolism. When honored for what they are and placed with mindfulness, they can serve as powerful allies for personal depth, clarity, and artistic refinement. When misused, however, they quietly erode social vitality, dampen wealth attraction, and foster emotional solitude, where connection and outward flow are most needed. In the dance of Feng Shui, as in the dance of life, context is everything. Understanding the true energetic nature of what you invite into your home allows you to create not just beauty, but harmony, an environment where every object, every color, and every living thing works in concert to build the life you dream of living. 3. Purple lilacs. Purple lilacs are among the most beloved flowering plants for their fragrant blooms and nostalgic beauty. They evoke memories of springtime, renewal, and gentler days. However, in the deeper view of Feng Shui, purple lilacs carry an energetic story that is not entirely uplifting. Beneath their sweet aroma and soft petals lies a vibration closely tied to grief, endings, and emotional exhaustion. While they can be healing when placed correctly in outdoor spaces, bringing purple lilacs into indoor environments, especially as permanent decor, can subtly introduce energies that, over time, weaken emotional resilience, slow personal momentum, and even cloud financial and relational progress. The color purple itself carries profound symbolic weight. In the energy language of Feng Shui, purple is linked to the spiritual, the mysterious, and the transitional. It bridges the worlds of manifestation and dissolution, connecting the visible and the unseen. While this can be powerful in meditation or spiritual pursuits, it is less beneficial for everyday living spaces where dynamic, vibrant chai is needed to support wealth accumulation, family harmony, and career growth. Furthermore, lilacs as a flower species have long been associated with remembrance and mourning across many cultures. In Western traditions, lilacs are often planted in cemeteries as symbols of remembrance. In Asian symbolism, their soft fragility represents the fleeting nature of youth and vitality. Energetically, they emit a gentle but persistent pull toward nostalgia, introspection, and the emotional heaviness that can accompany loss. When purple lilacs are placed indoors, their energy field infuses the space with a subtle vibration of endings rather than beginnings. This can manifest in the lives of residents in surprisingly tangible ways. Projects lose steam just before completion. Relationships begin to drift apart with no clear reason. Financial growth efforts stall at crucial moments. Residents may find themselves revisiting old regrets, unable to fully anchor their attention and energy into present and future opportunities. Emotional fatigue sets in quietly but steadily, accompanied by a growing sense that life is slipping just slightly out of reach. One might argue that these effects seem exaggerated for something as innocuous as a flower, but Feng Shui teaches that energy operates on both gross and subtle levels. It is often not the glaring disruptions that undermine success, but the quiet, persistent currents of misaligned qi that slowly but surely erode vitality, optimism, and forward motion. Purple lilacs, despite their beauty, introduce precisely this kind of subtle misalignment when placed carelessly indoors. For a real-world example, consider the experience of an older couple, Ellen and Richard, who sought to revitalize their home after retirement. Eager to refresh their living space, they brought in various plants and flowers, including a large arrangement of purple lilacs for their family room. Over the next year, despite their initial excitement, they noticed a creeping melancholy settling over their home. Family visits became less frequent. Ellen felt her motivation to pursue hobbies fading. Richard, once energetic about new projects, struggled to maintain focus. Financially, their investments stagnated. After seeking advice from a Feng Shui consultant, they learned about the subtle but powerful emotional pull that purple lilacs could exert indoors. They removed the lilacs, replaced them with lively, bright sunflowers and healthy jade plants, and within months, the emotional atmosphere shifted back toward vibrancy and forward momentum. The lesson from their story is not that lilacs are inherently negative. Like all elements in Feng Shui, their influence depends on placement, intention, and environmental context. Outdoors, purple lilacs can offer profound emotional healing. In gardens, balconies, or courtyards, their energy disperses naturally into the open air, where it can assist in gentle closure processes without stagnating the active qi of living spaces. Their fragrance under open skies brings comfort, remembrance, and peace without trapping homes in cycles of looking backward. From a practical perspective, if you love lilacs, and many people do, it is wise to cultivate them in external, transitional spaces where their symbolism of memory and gentle endings can find appropriate expression. Gardens are ideal because they are spaces of both growth and decay, life and return, and the natural cycles that lilacs symbolize are in harmonious resonance there. Balconies also work, especially when paired with more yang, upward-growing plants to maintain energy balance. But bringing lilacs indoors, particularly into areas dedicated to financial growth, family gatherings, or career advancement, is energetically risky and generally discouraged. If purple lilacs are already present in your home and you notice signs of emotional heaviness, financial stalling, or relational cooling, it may be beneficial to consider a gentle energy adjustment. Removing the lilacs respectfully, perhaps offering gratitude for their beauty before relocating them outdoors, allows for the energetic shift to occur with grace rather than abruptness. Replacing them with flowers that support active, vibrant, and forward-moving chai, such as yellow chrysanthemums for stability, red peonies for wealth, or fresh green plants for renewal, can restore the home's energetic field and reopen channels for prosperity and emotional warmth. Moreover, it is crucial to recognize that Feng Shui is not about living in fear of symbols, but about cultivating conscious environmental alignment. If a certain flower, object, or color carries personal joy and authentic vitality for you, that energy can in many cases override generalized interpretations. However, when subtle signs of misalignment appear, fatigue, stagnation, unexplained melancholy, it is wise to listen to the space and consider gentle adjustments that honor both personal preference and ancient wisdom. In the broader philosophy of Feng Shui, homes are not static structures, but living, breathing extensions of those who inhabit them. Every object, from the grandest furniture piece to the smallest flower, contributes to the symphony of energies shaping daily experience and long-term destiny. Purple lilacs, with their dual legacy of beauty and sorrow, teach a poignant lesson. Not every lovely thing is meant to be held close. Some beauties are best admired from a respectful distance, allowed to bless but not burden, to comfort without confining. In closing, if you love the sight and scent of lilacs, enjoy them fully, but do so with the wisdom of placement. Let them grace your garden, scent your balcony, soften your outer thresholds. Within your living spaces, reserve room for flowers and plants that not only delight the senses, but actively propel your energy toward growth, connection, abundance, and joy. Choose symbols that open doors, not ones that gently, almost imperceptibly, draw you backward. In doing so, you honor both the beauty of the past and the limitless promise of the future. 4. Narcissus. Narcissus flowers, with their delicate beauty and vibrant fragrance, are often associated with celebration, new beginnings, and hope. In many cultures, particularly within Eastern traditions, narcissus are prominently displayed during festive seasons, such as Lunar New Year, symbolizing the arrival of wealth, good fortune, and family unity. Their bright blooms and lively presence seem to embody everything positive that one could wish to invite into a home at the start of a new cycle. However, when examined through the lens of Feng Shui, narcissus carry a more nuanced energy profile that requires careful handling. While they are indeed auspicious when used seasonally, their prolonged presence indoors, especially throughout the entire year, can lead to an accumulation of stagnant qi, subtle emotional sadness, and missed opportunities, ultimately undermining the very prosperity they are initially intended to support. In Feng Shui, timing and cyclical alignment are critical components of how energy behaves. Certain symbols, objects, and elements are powerful because they harmonize with specific seasons, celestial movements, and energetic shifts. Narcissus flowers are highly potent during times of renewal, particularly around the Lunar New Year, when the collective energy field is oriented toward fresh starts, open doors, and upward momentum. In this context, the narcissus acts as a catalyst, amplifying the collective excitement, gratitude, and optimism that naturally arise at the dawn of a new year. Its energy resonates with the spirit of hopeful anticipation, filling spaces with an electric sense of possibility. However, the energetic structure of narcissus is inherently transient. Like a comet that burns brightly across the sky but is not meant to linger, narcissus flowers are designed to inspire a moment of heightened chai, not to anchor long-term environmental energy. Their life cycle, short and brilliant, mirrors their energetic role. When kept indoors well beyond their natural season of influence, their qi begins to decline, creating a subtle but tangible drag on the energetic flow of the home. What was once uplifting becomes weighty. What was once inspiring becomes a quiet reminder of opportunities missed or vitality dissipated. This transition happens imperceptibly at first. Residents may not immediately notice a difference. However, over weeks and months, a creeping sense of stagnation can set in. Financial prospects that once seemed vibrant begin to slow or encounter unexplained obstacles. Emotional energy within the home feels heavier, more burdened by unspoken worries or lingering regrets. Motivation to pursue new goals wanes, replaced by a vague sense of inertia or resignation. Relationships can subtly cool, not through conflict, but through a lack of renewed connection. These shifts are rarely dramatic, but they are cumulative, and their impact over time can be profound. The underlying energetic reason for this transformation lies in the principle that all living things, including symbolic representations like flowers, emit energy that corresponds to their natural rhythms. Narcissus by nature are a spring phenomenon. They burst forth quickly, brightly but briefly. Trying to force their symbolism into a year-round presence is like trying to hold on to spring itself indefinitely, a distortion of natural energetic cycles that inevitably breeds imbalance. Feng Shui honors the wisdom of timing. It recognizes that energy flows best when it mirrors the natural ebb and flow of life. To illustrate the consequences of misaligned Narcissus energy, consider the case of a boutique hotel owner named Lena, who incorporated Narcissus arrangements throughout her property year-round after experiencing a record-breaking Lunar New Year season. In the months that followed, bookings began to decline inexplicably. Guest reviews, once effusive, became lukewarm. Staff morale dipped, and Lena herself felt an increasing sense of creative blockage regarding future growth strategies. Upon consulting a Feng Shui specialist, it was discovered that the Narcissus flowers, once powerful amplifiers of festive qi, had become reservoirs of stagnant energy, symbolically trapping the hotel in a perpetual post-celebration hangover. After replacing the Narcissus with seasonally appropriate, high-energy plants and flowers, and realigning the hotel's energy flow to match the changing seasons, Lena saw a gradual but steady return of guest enthusiasm, financial momentum, and staff vitality. The lesson from Lena's experience is clear. The potency of Narcissus lies in their alignment with specific energetic seasons, not in their year-round presence. By respecting their natural arc, bringing them in to celebrate new beginnings, allowing them to bless the space with a burst of renewal, and then gracefully retiring them once their time has passed, residents and business owners can harness their full energetic benefit without risking the accumulation of emotional and financial stagnation. Practically speaking, the best approach for using Narcissus in Feng Shui is to display them prominently from a few days before the Lunar New Year through the first 15 days of the new lunar cycle. During this period, their energy aligns perfectly with collective human focus on rebirth, expansion, and gratitude. After this window, however, it is advisable to either allow the flowers to complete their natural cycle and compost them respectfully, or to relocate them outdoors where their declining qi can disperse harmlessly into the broader environment. Holding on to Narcissus indoors past their prime sends mixed energetic signals to the subconscious mind, a clinging to the past rather than an embrace of the ongoing flow of life and opportunity. Additionally, it is important to note that Narcissus, like several other traditional festive plants, can carry physical toxicity, particularly for young children and pets. While this factor does not directly influence their energetic profile, it adds a layer of practical caution that reinforces the Feng Shui principle of using such flowers temporarily and mindfully rather than as permanent fixtures. If emotional attachment to Narcissus is strong, perhaps due to family traditions or personal memories, they can still be honored without compromising the energy of the home. One strategy is to photograph the Narcissus at their peak and create a small, discreet seasonal memory album. This allows the emotional resonance of the flowers to be preserved and appreciated without tethering the physical, declining energy to the living spaces. In this way, the positive symbolism of renewal and celebration is kept alive internally while the external environment remains energetically fresh, aligned, and dynamic. Another proactive method is to pair Narcissus displays with active, upward-moving elements during their display window, such as water features, crystal accents, or vibrant red and gold color schemes. These additions amplify the auspicious qualities of the Narcissus while counterbalancing their natural tendency towards stillness as they age. However, even with these energetic supports, the principle remains. Narcissus energy is seasonal, not perpetual. In summary, Narcissus are gifts of light, hope, and fresh beginnings when used in harmony with their natural season. They uplift homes, invigorate businesses, and inspire hearts when allowed to shine during their rightful time. But when kept beyond their prime, they inadvertently transform from energetic catalysts into quiet anchors of stagnation, subtly impeding growth, vitality, and prosperity. By aligning our use of Narcissus with the wisdom of seasonal timing, we not only honor their true nature, but also invite a deeper rhythm of success, renewal, and emotional well-being into our lives. 5. Poppies. Poppies, with their vivid colors and delicate, papery petals, have captivated human imagination for thousands of years. Their striking appearance evokes both admiration and reverence across cultures, often being associated with beauty, peace, and remembrance. However, in the context of Feng Shui and deeper energetic understanding, poppies carry a more somber, cautionary vibration that requires careful consideration when it comes to home placement. Their symbolic ties to sleep, illusions, emotional numbness, and even death render them energetically unsuitable for most indoor environments, particularly in spaces where clarity, ambition, and active energy are desired and necessary. In Feng Shui, the objective is to cultivate an environment that supports the ongoing flow of vibrant qi, encouraging personal growth, health, success, and harmonious relationships. Every object within a space either nourishes this flow or subtly obstructs it. Poppies, despite their undeniable visual beauty, embody energetic qualities that introduce heaviness, confusion, and stagnation rather than momentum and clarity. They vibrate on a frequency that resonates with endings, transitions, and altered states of consciousness. Energies that are powerful in certain ceremonial or commemorative contexts, but deeply misaligned with the energetic needs of a thriving home. Historically, poppies have been laden with profound cultural symbolism. In ancient Greek mythology, poppies were sacred to Hypnos, the god of sleep, and Morpheus, the god of dreams. They were believed to possess the power to lull mortals and immortals alike into deep slumber and dreamlike states. In the context of Chinese culture, poppies are often linked with mourning, remembrance of the dead, and the transitory nature of human life. In the modern Western world, red poppies have become enduring symbols of wartime remembrance, honoring those who have passed on in battle. While each of these associations carries its own dignity and beauty, they all orbit the same energetic theme: the transition from active life to stillness, from clarity to the fog of dreams and memory. Energetically speaking, bringing poppies into the home invites the subtle forces of sleep, illusion, and dissolution into the living environment. Over time, this can manifest in a variety of challenging ways. Residents may find themselves struggling with diminished focus and ambition. Projects that once inspired excitement and clear direction may become bogged down in confusion or procrastination. Emotional energy may become muted, leading to feelings of apathy or detachment from goals and relationships. Even physical vitality can be impacted, as the symbolic weight of poppies encourages withdrawal and passivity rather than active engagement with life. To understand this effect more tangibly, consider the story of Marcus, a writer who prided himself on cultivating a home environment that reflected his artistic temperament. Drawn to the poetic symbolism of poppies, Marcus adorned his study with paintings and vases of artificial poppies, believing they would inspire deep, meaningful creative work. Initially, he did find himself drawn into rich internal landscapes of thought and imagination. However, over the course of a year, Marcus noticed a troubling pattern. His output slowed dramatically. Ideas that once flowed effortlessly became tangled and incomplete. Motivation to complete projects dissipated. Financially, the decline in productivity began to strain his freelance income. Relationships also grew strained as Marcus became increasingly withdrawn and emotionally unresponsive. Upon consulting a Feng Shui practitioner, Marcus learned that while poppies had nurtured his capacity for dreaming, they had also dulled his ability to act, to focus, and to sustain forward momentum. By replacing the poppies with more vibrant, upward energy plants such as bamboo and bright sunflowers, Marcus gradually restored balance to his environment. Within months, his creative clarity returned, his projects regained structure, and his professional and personal lives rebounded. This example highlights a critical insight. Symbols, no matter how beautiful or meaningful, must be matched to the energetic function we wish to cultivate in our spaces. Poppies are not bad flowers. They are powerful energetic archetypes, but their power lies in their alignment with themes of rest, endings, and the dissolution of form. These qualities are sacred in their proper context, mourning rituals, memorial spaces, or dream work, but they are fundamentally counterproductive when seeking to build prosperity, clarity, ambition, and emotional vibrancy within the home. In practical Feng Shui application, it is advisable to avoid placing poppies, whether fresh, dried, or artificial, in key energetic sectors of the home, such as the wealth corner, southeast, the fame and reputation sector, south, or the career sector, north. These areas thrive on dynamic, outward-moving chai that is fundamentally incompatible with the inward-pulling energy of poppies. Displaying poppies in these spaces can subtly but steadily erode financial momentum, professional recognition, and personal ambition. Even in bedrooms, where a certain level of restfulness is desirable, poppies are not ideal. While they might seem to promote sleep, they also introduce themes of detachment and emotional numbness, which can undermine the intimacy and renewal that healthy bedrooms are meant to support. If one feels deeply connected to the aesthetic of poppies and wishes to honor their symbolic meaning without disrupting the home's qi, several strategies can be employed. First, confine poppy imagery to transitional spaces such as memorial gardens, meditation corners specifically dedicated to reflective practices, or symbolic altars honoring ancestors or loved ones who have passed. In these contexts, the poppy's energy resonates appropriately, supporting remembrance, reverence, and closure without leaking into areas of active living. Second, balance any poppy representations with strong, life-affirming elements such as candles, crystals, or living plants to ensure that the energy remains anchored in vitality rather than drifting into heaviness. It is also crucial to understand that color amplifies symbolic energy in Feng Shui. Red poppies, with their intense association with blood, sacrifice, and the cessation of life, carry the strongest energetic caution. White poppies, sometimes associated with peace, still resonate with themes of surrender and release rather than active prosperity. Therefore, regardless of the color variant, poppies must be treated with mindfulness and respect, ensuring that their placement supports the emotional and energetic outcomes one truly desires. In summary, poppies are mesmerizing, evocative flowers whose symbolic weight transcends mere beauty. They invite reflection on the cycles of life and death, the necessity of rest, and the mystery of dreams. Yet within the energetic structure of a thriving home, their presence often introduces a slow but steady decline in clarity, ambition, and emotional engagement. By understanding their true energetic signature and placing them appropriately, or choosing more dynamically supportive symbols for active living spaces, individuals can cultivate environments that sustain energy, sharpen focus, and propel both personal and professional success forward. In the delicate art of Feng Shui, beauty is never enough. It is the energy behind the beauty that ultimately shapes the destiny of those who live within its reach. 6. Red spider lilies. Red spider lilies, with their eerie, otherworldly beauty, are among the most visually striking flowers known to humanity. Their long, spidery petals and vivid crimson hue immediately command attention, evoking emotions that are both awe-inspiring and subtly unsettling. However, behind their haunting appearance lies an energetic signature that is steeped in themes of separation, loss, death, and intense yin energy. In Feng Shui, where the goal is to harmonize environments to support life, prosperity, connection, and vitality, red spider lilies are considered among the least desirable flowers to place indoors or within spaces intended for growth, joy, and financial abundance. Their energetic symbolism is so potent that even in cultures deeply familiar with their beauty, these flowers are respectfully relegated to cemeteries, remote temples, or isolated meditation gardens where their energy can be contained and honored without interfering with everyday human activities. The historical and mythological associations of red spider lilies amplify their energetic impact. In Japanese folklore, they are known as higanbana, the flower of the afterlife, believed to guide souls into the next world. They are traditionally planted along graveyards and temple paths to mark the boundary between the world of the living and the world of spirits. In Chinese culture, they are often linked with stories of lovers separated by death, blooming each year as a reminder of lost connections. Across these traditions, a common thread emerges. Red spider lilies are emblems of parting, of final goodbyes, of transitions from life to death. Their energy, while beautiful in its solemnity, is profoundly yin, cool inward, heavy, and profoundly tied to endings rather than beginnings. In Feng Shui practice, The placement of such potent symbols must be handled with extreme care. Living environments intended to nurture vibrant life force energy, chai, thrive on balance, movement, and positive flow. Introducing a symbol so deeply associated with the cessation of life, emotional separation, and permanent farewells into such a space disrupts the desired energy field. Over time, the presence of red spider lilies indoors can manifest as emotional coldness among family members, difficulties in sustaining long-term relationships, persistent feelings of loneliness or alienation, and a general sense of being disconnected from opportunities for growth and happiness. Financial chite can also suffer as the energy of separation and loss subtly erodes the vitality necessary for building and sustaining greater wealth. To see the tangible effects of misplaced red spider lilies, consider the experience of a young entrepreneur named Lillian, who, enchanted by the exotic appearance of these flowers, incorporated large artistic prints of red spider lilies into her new home office. Initially, she believed the flowers' dramatic impact would inspire creativity and boldness. However, within a year, Lillian noticed troubling patterns. Business partnerships she had nurtured for years inexplicably dissolved. Clients she had trusted began withdrawing their support. Personally, she found herself growing emotionally distant from friends and family, often feeling isolated even in familiar company. Financial opportunities slipped through her fingers despite her best efforts. Upon seeking advice from a Feng Shui consultant, it became clear that the symbolic resonance of the red spider lilies was broadcasting a field of separation and endings directly into her career and personal spheres. By removing the flower imagery and replacing it with symbols of vitality and expansion, such as lush green plants and sun motifs, Lillian gradually rebuilt the warmth and momentum in her life. This example underscores a critical Feng Shui principle. The unseen energy that objects radiate is just as influential as their visual appearance. Beauty alone is never sufficient justification for placement. Energetic compatibility with the desired life outcomes must always guide the selection and arrangement of elements within a space. Red spider lilies, though mesmerizing, belong to realms where their energy aligns naturally, with remembrance, honoring the dead, supporting reflection on life's impermanence, not within living, thriving homes that seek to attract abundance, joy, and connection. From a practical standpoint, the safest and most respectful way to honor red spider lilies is to appreciate them in spaces that are purposefully designed for quiet contemplation, mourning, or solitary meditation, far removed from daily living areas. Cemeteries, memorial gardens, or secluded corners of large temple grounds are appropriate environments where the lily's powerful yin energy can be harmoniously integrated without adversely affecting the living. If one feels a personal connection to their symbolism, perhaps due to cultural heritage or personal experience, it is advisable to limit their presence to symbolic representations, such as a photograph stored in an album, rather than featuring them prominently within active living or working spaces. Moreover, it is important to understand that energy does not discriminate between real and symbolic representations. Even artistic depictions of red spider lilies carry energetic weight. A painting, a print, or even a stylized sculpture can transmit the same frequencies associated with loss and separation. Therefore, mindful curation of imagery, not just physical plants, is essential when designing spaces intended to support life's flourishing energies. The fundamental caution surrounding red spider lilies reflects one of the deepest truths of Feng Shui. Spaces speak. They speak not just to us, but for us. They tell the universe who we are, what we value, what we are prepared to welcome, and what we are unconsciously holding on to. By filling our homes with symbols of loss, endings, and detachment, we inadvertently send signals that we are aligned with those energies, attracting more of the same into our experiences. Conversely, by consciously choosing symbols that evoke vitality, unity, growth, and joy, we align our environment into year-round environments, and therefore ourselves, with the flourishing we seek. It is also crucial to recognize that while death, loss, and endings are natural and sacred parts of existence, they require sacred spaces, rituals, and timing distinct from the ongoing flow of everyday life. Attempting to merge these energies into living spaces intended for daily activity and expansion creates confusion in the chi field. weakening the home's ability to act as a supportive container for ambition, prosperity, and emotional fulfillment. In summary, red spider lilies are profound teachers about the beauty and inevitability of life's transitions. Their stark, dramatic presence reminds us of the preciousness of life and the certainty of change. However, within the energetic ecosystem of the home, their power must be respected and carefully circumscribed. They are best left to spaces of remembrance, where their energy can fulfill its highest purpose without interfering with the dynamic, life-affirming chi that homes must cultivate to support their inhabitants' dreams, goals, and emotional well-being. In the sacred dialogue between self and space, choosing the right symbols is not merely a matter of taste. It is a fundamental act of self-alignment and energetic integrity. 7. Bird of Paradise. The bird of paradise flower, with its dramatic silhouette, vibrant colors, and exotic charm, is often seen as a symbol of freedom, success, and daring beauty. Its bold presence demands attention, and in gardens or open spaces, it can create a striking statement of upward movement and ambition. However, when examined through the lens of Feng Shui, the bird of paradise carries an intense, concentrated yang energy that, while powerful, can easily disrupt the delicate balance of a living space when misplaced. Especially indoors, within personal or intimate settings, its sharp, almost aggressive energy signature can introduce tension, restlessness, and conflict, qualities that undermine the calm, stable, and nurturing qi that a home or workspace needs to thrive. In Feng Shui philosophy, balance is everything. Homes are not meant to be dominated by either yin or yang energy, but should represent a harmonious blend of the two, shifting subtly according to seasons, times of day, and the needs of the inhabitants. Excessive yang energy, characterized by heat, brightness, movement, and force, can overwhelm a space, making it feel restless, emotionally charged, and mentally exhausting. The bird of paradise, with its spear-like petals and fiery color palette of oranges, reds, and deep purples, radiates an abundance of this yang force. Outdoors, in open-air gardens or along the front path of a home where natural expansiveness diffuses and balances strong energies, the bird of paradise can be a beneficial, energizing symbol, announcing vitality and courage to the world. But indoors, especially in confined spaces like bedrooms, small offices, or meditation corners, its force can clash violently with the intended purpose of rest, focus, and emotional harmony. The structure of the bird of paradise itself reveals its energetic nature. Its flowers erupt upward and outward with rigid, pointed shapes that resemble arrows or flames. In Feng Shui, sharp forms are referred to as poison arrows, symbolic expressions of cutting energy that can metaphorically pierce the qi of a space, creating subtle fields of stress, irritation, or even latent hostility. In social settings, this can manifest as frequent misunderstandings, competitiveness, or strained relationships among those sharing the space. On a personal level, individuals living or working near bird of paradise flowers indoors may find themselves feeling inexplicably anxious, impatient, or mentally fragmented. Sleep may be disturbed, concentration may wane, and emotional equilibrium may be harder to maintain. To illustrate these effects more vividly, consider the case of Ethan, a graphic designer who, after moving into a new apartment, chose to decorate his compact home office with a large potted bird of paradise plant. Initially, Ethan was drawn to the plant's dramatic aesthetic, believing it would symbolize creativity and personal breakthrough. However, over the next several months, he noticed that his work sessions became increasingly chaotic. He found it difficult to maintain a steady focus, jumping from project to project without completing tasks. Tension in his professional relationships increased, with minor disagreements escalating unnecessarily. Even his sleep patterns were affected, with restlessness and vivid, unsettling dreams becoming frequent. Suspecting that something in his environment was out of alignment, Ethan consulted a Feng Shui specialist who immediately identified the bird of paradise as a major energetic disruptor for his small, enclosed workspace. After moving the plant outdoors to his apartment balcony and introducing softer, rounder, and more yin-aligned plants indoors, such as peace lilies and jade plants, Ethan experienced a significant calming of his mental state, improved focus, and smoother professional interactions. This example highlights a key Feng Shui insight. The energy a plant or object emits must match the energetic needs of the space it occupies. The bird of paradise is a potent symbol of expansion and boldness, but like fire, it must be contained and directed properly to avoid unintended damage. In the open expanse of a front yard or a spacious courtyard, its fierce beauty announces strength, ambition, and vitality to the universe, helping to draw in opportunities and assert a presence of confidence. Positioned thoughtfully along the main entry path to a home, it can energize the mouth of chai, the primary gateway through which prosperity and opportunities flow into the residence. In this context, its strong yang force is not only appropriate but desirable, enhancing the home's ability to claim and hold positive energy from the external environment. Indoors, however, particularly in areas designed for inward reflection, healing, or relational intimacy, the bird of paradise's energy becomes too aggressive, destabilizing the delicate emotional and psychological processes that require gentleness and grounding to flourish. Bedrooms in particular suffer from the presence of excessively sharp or fiery elements. A bedroom's chai should promote relaxation, emotional vulnerability, and regenerative sleep, all of which are disrupted by the piercing energy of pointed, yang-heavy plants like the bird of paradise. If one is deeply attached to the aesthetic of the bird of paradise and wishes to retain its presence in a living space, several adjustments can be made to harmonize its impact. First, placement near windows where natural light and airflow can diffuse its energy is preferable. Second, balancing it with softer, round-leafed plants or elements representing water, such as an indoor fountain or curved mirrors, can help moderate its intense yang signature. Third, using it in public, social areas like large living rooms, rather than intimate, private spaces, allows its dynamic energy to invigorate conversation and activity without overwhelming more sensitive zones. However, even with these mitigations, most Feng Shui practitioners would recommend that the bird of paradise's best expression remains outdoors, where its bold statement of life force can be celebrated without causing disruption to the internal energetic ecology of the home. Furthermore, it is essential to remember that the symbolism of plants extends beyond their physical presence. Artistic representations, such as paintings or sculptures of the bird of paradise, can carry a similar energetic charge depending on how they are rendered. Artworks that emphasize the flower's fiery, spear-like qualities should be treated with the same discernment as the physical plant itself, ensuring they are placed in areas where stimulation and outward energy are beneficial rather than harmful. In broader Feng Shui philosophy, designing a supportive environment is not simply about removing objects associated with negative qualities, but about consciously aligning every element with the life outcomes one seeks to nurture. When ambition, visibility, and bold action are desired, the bird of paradise can serve as an empowering symbol, if kept within the right context. But when peace, intimacy, focused productivity, and emotional warmth are the goals, its energy must be respected and, more often than not, respectfully kept at a distance from the core living and personal spaces. In conclusion, the bird of paradise flower is a magnificent testament to nature's capacity for drama, strength, and dazzling beauty. Its presence commands respect and admiration, but it must be wielded with wisdom. In Feng Shui, power without balance is not true harmony. It is a force that, if left unchecked, can fracture the very foundation it was meant to enhance. By recognizing the intense yang energy inherent in the bird of paradise and placing it thoughtfully in expansive outdoor settings or carefully moderated indoor environments, one can harness its vitality without sacrificing the emotional, psychological, and financial stability that a truly prosperous home must cultivate. Positive alternatives. While it is important to understand which flowers can unintentionally disrupt the energy of a space, it is equally powerful to know which floral allies actively enhance the vibrancy, prosperity, and emotional balance of a home. Feng Shui is not merely about avoidance. It is fundamentally about conscious cultivation, choosing elements that strengthen and sustain the energies you wish to magnify in your life. In this spirit, let's explore 4 extraordinary flowers that are not only visually stunning, but also energetically aligned with wealth, harmony, and joyful expansion. These flowers have been revered across cultures and centuries, not just for their beauty, but for their profound ability to influence human fortune in subtle but tangible ways. Peonies are often hailed as the queen of flowers in Feng Shui, and for good reason. Their lush, rounded blooms symbolize abundance in every sense: financial wealth, romantic fulfillment, and elevated social status. Traditionally associated with royalty and prosperity in Chinese culture, peonies carry an expansive, rich qi that fills a space with an atmosphere of flourishing. They project a powerful but gentle energy that encourages opportunities to bloom, relationships to deepen, and reputations to shine. Importantly, peonies embody a balanced dynamic between yin and yang, strong enough to anchor financial success, yet soft enough to nurture emotional intimacy. In the home, placing fresh peonies in the wealth corner, southeast sector, can energize financial growth, while positioning them in the relationship corner, southwest sector, can help attract or deepen romantic partnerships. However, timing is crucial. The most potent energy arises when peonies are displayed in full bloom, symbolizing the full manifestation of wealth and happiness. Artificial peonies, if chosen carefully with high-quality craftsmanship, can also carry positive symbolism year-round, provided they are maintained with care and intention. Sunflowers, with their bold golden faces turning always toward the sun, represent optimism, resilience, and unstoppable forward momentum. In Feng Shui, sunflowers are potent activators of yang energy, the force that drives action, visibility, and success. Their upright posture and vibrant color make them ideal for energizing spaces associated with career advancement, public recognition, and personal achievement. Sunflowers radiate a kind of joyful determination that uplifts everyone who encounters them, making them perfect additions to home offices, study areas, or the fame and reputation sector of a home, Guyana South. Their bright presence counters stagnation, breaks through mental fog, and recharges ambition. Moreover, sunflowers are associated with loyalty and longevity, meaning their energy not only sparks new beginnings, but also supports the sustained effort needed to see goals through to completion. If you find yourself struggling with procrastination, low morale, or career uncertainty, placing a vibrant bouquet of sunflowers near your workspace can subtly but powerfully realign your internal drive with external opportunities. Chrysanthemums, though sometimes misunderstood in Western cultures as symbols of mourning, are celebrated in Feng Shui for their protective and stabilizing qualities. They are considered guardians of health, longevity, and peaceful prosperity. The key lies in the color and context. Yellow chrysanthemums, in particular, carry strong earth element energy, providing grounding, nourishment, and emotional balance. Their rounded shape and orderly petals emit a calming, steady qi that fortifies the body's resilience and the mind's clarity. In the home, chrysanthemums are best placed in health sectors, center, or family sectors, east, to reinforce vitality and harmony among residents. They also make excellent additions to dining areas, where they promote gratitude and contentment, qualities that naturally attract more abundance. Importantly, chrysanthemums help buffer against external chaos, creating a sanctuary effect that insulates the home's energy from disruptive outside forces. In periods of high stress, uncertainty, or transition, chrysanthemums act like energetic anchors, holding steady the inner foundation needed for enduring success. Tulips, with their sleek stems and vibrant, cup-shaped blooms, embody the spirit of fresh beginnings, hope, and smooth progress. Unlike more complex layered flowers, tulips present themselves with elegant simplicity, symbolizing the clarity and straightforwardness necessary for effective new ventures. In Feng Shui, tulips are associated with the wood element, supporting growth, expansion, and upward mobility. Their energy is softer than sunflowers, but equally encouraging, making them perfect for times when gentle encouragement is needed to navigate transitions. Whether moving to a new home, starting a new career, or healing from a difficult emotional chapter. Tulips in bright, cheerful colors like red, pink, and yellow are especially effective for energizing entryways, invigorating personal development areas, northeast, or enhancing family harmony in common spaces. Tulips remind us that beginnings do not have to be chaotic, or overwhelming. They can be graceful, beautiful, and filled with quiet strength. It is also worth noting that in Feng Shui practice, the condition and care of flowers matter deeply. Freshness, vibrancy, and intentional placement magnify positive energy, while neglect, wilting, or random positioning can diminish or even reverse the benefits. Therefore, regardless of the flower chosen, a spirit of mindful stewardship must accompany the physical act of decoration. Changing water daily, removing spent blooms promptly, and arranging flowers with thoughtful purpose transforms them from mere ornaments into active participants in the home's chai field. Another important nuance is the symbolism of numbers in flower arrangements. Odd numbers, particularly 3, 5, and 9, are considered auspicious because they symbolize movement, dynamism, and continuous growth. Arranging peonies, sunflowers, chrysanthemums, or tulips in clusters of these numbers can amplify their energetic effects, creating mini vortexes of positivity throughout the home. In some cases, combining flowers strategically can create synergistic energy fields. For example, a mixed arrangement of peonies and sunflowers placed near a professional workspace can simultaneously energize wealth accumulation and career visibility. A grouping of chrysanthemums and tulips in a family room can stabilize health while encouraging joyful interactions among household members. By understanding the unique vibrational qualities of each flower, homeowners can become active architects of their energetic environments, tailoring qi flow to support specific life goals and dreams. It is also critical to align flower choices with personal elemental needs. In advanced Feng Shui practice, an individual's birth element, determined by their Chinese zodiac and 5 elements theory, influences which flowers and colors best support their life path. For instance, someone with a strong fire element might benefit most from the grounding energy of yellow chrysanthemums, while someone with dominant earth energy might thrive with the uplifting power of vibrant tulips or sunflowers. Tailoring floral selections to one's elemental profile adds a layer of precision and personalization to Feng Shui flower work, maximizing benefits and deepening resonance. Finally, flowers remind us of an essential truth at the heart of Feng Shui. Life is meant to be beautiful, vital, and ever-evolving. Just as flowers bloom, fade, and bloom again, our environments must be living systems that mirror and support our own growth cycles. By choosing the right flowers, placing them with conscious intention, and caring for them as energetic companions rather than mere decorations, we participate actively in shaping a life of abundance, connection, and flourishing. Placement tips: how to manage floral energy wisely. Understanding which flowers support positive qi is only half of the Feng Shui equation. The other, equally critical half, lies in how these floral energies are managed within the space. Placement, maintenance, and seasonal rotation are not mere aesthetic choices. They are strategic energy practices that determine whether flowers amplify or inadvertently dampen the prosperity, harmony, and vitality of a home. Just as a skilled conductor shapes the performance of an orchestra, a mindful homeowner must direct the flow of floral energy with conscious intention to ensure that it sings in harmony with their life's ambitions. The first and most important principle of managing floral energy wisely is the selection of active qi areas for flower placement. In Feng Shui, active qi areas are spaces that experience regular movement, interaction, and life force activity. Places like living rooms, dining rooms, and entryways. These zones are natural energetic crossroads where family members gather, guests are welcomed, and the energetic tone of the home is established. Placing vibrant, life-affirming flowers in these areas helps magnify the natural movement of qi, uplifting everyone who enters and reinforcing a field of abundance, joy, and opportunity. Flowers in these spaces serve as living beacons, signaling to both the subconscious mind and the broader energetic universe that the home is alive, flourishing, and receptive to blessing. Living rooms, often the largest and most central space in a home, benefit enormously from fresh floral arrangements. Positioned thoughtfully, such as on coffee tables, sideboards, or near windows, flowers activate the energy flow, create a visual focal point that draws people together, and encourage lively, heart-centered communication. In dining rooms, where the act of nourishment is elevated into a ritual of family connection and gratitude, Flowers placed at the center of the table symbolize a continuous blessing of abundance and vitality over every shared meal. Entryways, as the literal mouths of qi, where all energy enters the home, are also ideal locations for floral energy. A bright, fresh arrangement near the front door serves as a welcoming gesture to prosperity itself, inviting wealth, health, and harmony to cross the threshold. Conversely, certain areas are ill-suited for floral placement and must be avoided if one wishes to manage energy wisely. Bathrooms, despite often being decorated with small floral touches, are considered energy sinks in Feng Shui. The downward movement of qi associated with drainage and waste in these spaces naturally pulls energy away rather than sustaining it. Placing flowers in bathrooms, therefore, invites the risk of pulling positive qi downward and out of the space, undermining the vitality the flowers are meant to support. Similarly, stagnant corners, areas where energy naturally pools and becomes sluggish due to lack of movement or light, are poor choices for flower placement unless they are being actively transformed through the addition of dynamic elements like lighting, mirrors, or moving water features. Otherwise, placing flowers there can inadvertently trap and decay their vibrant chai rather than magnifying it. Closed-off spaces, such as storage rooms or seldom-used hallways, also fail to provide the dynamic circulation needed to keep floral energy alive and thriving. Another critical practice for managing floral energy is the seasonal rotation of arrangements. Just as nature moves through cycles of growth, blossoming, harvest, and rest, so too must the energetic landscape of the home reflect the changing seasons. Keeping the same flowers, arrangements, or even colors year-round creates energetic monotony, signaling stagnation rather than growth. Seasonal rotation keeps qi fresh, responsive, and vibrant. In spring, arrangements should reflect the upward surge of wood energy, bright greens, pastel tulips, blossoming branches. In summer, fire energy dominates, inviting bold, passionate blooms like sunflowers, peonies, and vibrant roses. Autumn calls for the grounded richness of earth energy, with arrangements featuring chrysanthemums, marigolds in deeper hues of gold, orange, and crimson. Winter, though a quieter season energetically, still benefits from life-affirming floral accents, such as evergreen sprigs, winter jasmine, or carefully maintained indoor plants that project resilience and latent vitality. By consciously aligning floral choices with the rhythms of nature, homeowners reinforce a powerful energetic message. This is a living, breathing space in sync with the larger flows of life. Equally important to placement and rotation is the principle of immaculate maintenance. In Feng Shui, wilted, dusty, or neglected flowers are not neutral objects. They are active sources of decaying chai that can reverse the positive effects intended by their initial placement. Just as rotting fruit invites flies and bacteria, neglected flowers invite the slow, invisible buildup of stagnant energy that weighs heavily on the prosperity, health, and emotional tone of his home. Therefore, vigilance is essential. Water must be changed daily or as needed to maintain freshness. Spent blooms must be removed promptly, allowing the arrangement to remain vital and visually uplifting. Vases must be kept clean and free of residue, symbolizing purity and the unimpeded flow of blessings. Even artificial flowers, which some use for their low-maintenance appeal, must be dusted regularly and replaced when they begin to look faded or worn. The guiding principle is simple but profound. Living or not, flowers within a home must always project vitality, freshness, and beauty, mirroring the energetic states that inhabitants wish to cultivate within themselves. For those who wish to deepen their mastery of floral feng shui, advanced placement techniques can be employed. One such technique involves using flowers to strengthen specific bagua sectors of the home. For example, placing white peonies in the west sector enhances creativity and children's luck, aligning with the metal element. Placing vibrant red sunflowers in the south sector boosts fame and reputation, activating the fire element. Soft yellow chrysanthemums in the northeast support knowledge, study, and self-cultivation through the earth element. By aligning flower type, color, and placement with the elemental and energetic needs of each sector, homeowners can craft an intricate energetic tapestry that supports every facet of their lives. Another refined practice is using flower height and container shape to influence qi flow. Tall, upright arrangements promote upward movement, ambition, and aspiration, ideal for career growth or personal advancement. Low, round arrangements promote grounding, stability, and intimacy, ideal for family rooms and dining areas. Vases that are round or gently curved encourage harmonious qi circulation, while sharply angular containers can introduce disruptive energy unless carefully balanced by soft, full arrangements. It is also essential to infuse each floral arrangement with personal intention. Before placing flowers, taking a quiet moment to set a clear, heartfelt intention, whether for prosperity, health, love, or joy, infuses the arrangement with directed qi. This transforms the flowers from passive objects into active participants in the home's energetic ecosystem. Over time, residents often report that intentional arrangements seem to work on their behalf, subtly reinforcing the life shifts they seek. Finally, flowers teach the profound Feng Shui lesson that beauty is not static, but dynamic. True beauty lies in responsiveness, adaptability, and renewal. By treating flowers not as fixed decor, but as living expressions of the home's evolving qi, homeowners align themselves with the deeper truths of prosperity and fulfillment. Prosperity is not a one-time achievement, but a daily cultivation. Relationships are not maintained by habit, but by conscious, loving attention. Health is not sustained by good luck, but by daily acts of renewal and gratitude. Flowers, with their ephemeral brilliance and cyclical nature, mirror these truths, reminding us to remain awake, responsive, and grateful for the life that flows through and around us. Gentle real-life story. Sometimes the most profound lessons in Feng Shui emerge not from textbooks or ancient manuscripts, but from simple, everyday experiences where real people encounter the invisible yet powerful forces that shape their lives. One such story comes from Clara, a spirited young entrepreneur who opened a boutique specializing in artisanal clothing and handcrafted jewelry. Full of excitement and ambition, Clara invested tremendous energy into curating her shop's inventory, designing the perfect customer experience, and creating an environment that would feel both luxurious and welcoming. Eager to make her boutique visually unforgettable, Clara chose bold, dramatic floral arrangements to anchor her interior design. Among her selections were striking displays of bird of paradise flowers and clusters of lush, purple lilacs positioned prominently near the entrance and around key merchandise areas. For the first few weeks, everything seemed promising. Foot traffic was steady, and initial sales were respectable. But as time went on, Clara began to notice subtle but troubling shifts. Despite beautiful products and positive customer feedback, actual purchases lagged behind expectations. More worryingly, a heavy atmosphere seemed to settle over the store. Staff members, once enthusiastic and engaged, became irritable and withdrawn. Small misunderstandings escalated into conflicts, and team morale declined steadily. Clara herself, once energized and inspired by her dream project, found her motivation fading, replaced by a gnawing sense of anxiety she couldn't explain. Promotional events that should have drawn excitement yielded disappointing results. Financially, the boutique began bleeding resources faster than it was generating revenue. Desperate to understand what was going wrong, Clara consulted a Feng Shui practitioner recommended by a friend. When the practitioner toured the boutique, she quickly identified a major energetic misalignment: the bird of paradise flowers and purple lilacs. While visually stunning, these flowers carried energy signatures fundamentally at odds with the goals of a prosperous retail environment. The bird of paradise, with its aggressive yang energy and sharp spear-like structure, was projecting an intense, competitive, and restless vibration into the space, creating subtle energetic friction among staff and customers alike. Meanwhile, the purple lilacs, deeply associated with endings, grief, and emotional exhaustion, were dampening the vibrant qi necessary for commercial success, casting a subconscious pall over the shopping experience. The Feng Shui consultant recommended an immediate and thoughtful rebalancing. The bird of paradise and purple lilacs were removed, replaced instead with arrangements of fresh peonies and golden chrysanthemums. Peonies, with their lush fullness and associations with wealth, romance, and high social status, were placed near the entrance to attract abundant chai and positive first impressions. Golden chrysanthemums, representing stability, health, and peaceful prosperity were positioned strategically throughout the boutique to reinforce grounding, gratitude, and emotional harmony. In addition to the floral changes, small mirrors were installed to expand and circulate qi more effectively, and soft music was introduced to smooth the energy flow during operating hours. The results were not instantaneous, but they were profound and steady. Within the first month, Clara noticed an improvement in the store's emotional atmosphere. Staff interactions became more supportive, patient, and collaborative. Customers lingered longer, often commenting on how comfortable and uplifting the space felt without consciously knowing why. Sales figures began to climb, not dramatically at first, but with a reassuring consistency that Clara had not experienced before. Within 3 months of implementing the Feng Shui adjustments, the boutique not only recovered its initial momentum, but exceeded Clara's early projections, allowing her to expand her product line and even begin planning a second location. Reflecting on her experience, Clara shared that the most important lesson she learned was not simply about the power of flowers or Feng Shui in the abstract, but about the importance of aligning her external environment with her internal intentions. She realized that good intentions, beautiful products, and hard work could be undermined by unseen energetic factors if not consciously managed. By respecting the subtle but potent influence of her surroundings, she was able to create a space where her dreams could flourish rather than falter. Her story serves as a gentle but powerful reminder. In the intricate dance between human aspiration and environmental energy, every element matters. Beauty is important, but in Feng Shui, beauty must also serve the life you are striving to build. Flowers in particular are not just ornaments. They are energetic messengers, broadcasting signals to the universe about the kind of experiences you are ready to receive. When chosen and placed with wisdom, they become allies in attracting success, happiness, and connection. When chosen without awareness, even the most stunning arrangements can quietly erode the foundations of the very dreams they were meant to celebrate. In the end, Clara's boutique blossomed not just because she removed bad flowers and installed good ones, but because she learned to listen to the space, to herself, and to the deeper currents that guide all flourishing endeavors. This lesson, timeless and universally applicable, is one that every homeowner, owner, entrepreneur, and dreamer would do well to remember. Success is never accidental. It is cultivated with intention, nourished by environment, and sustained by conscious, loving attention to the energies that shape our lives from the inside out. Final, wealth responds to the field you set. Wealth is not simply earned through toil or accumulated through strategy alone. True, enduring wealth, whether it manifests as financial success, vibrant health, flourishing relationships, or a deep sense of personal fulfillment, responds to the invisible field you create and maintain around yourself every single day. It is shaped by the silent conversations between you and your environment, by the quiet signals your home, your workspace, and your personal aura send out into the greater fabric of the universe. In Feng Shui, we understand that nothing is neutral. Every object, every color, every scent, every living thing either reinforces your alignment with abundance or subtly pulls you away from it. Wealth is not coerced or chased. It is magnetized through the artful design of your life's energetic landscape. Your space, whether you consciously realize it or not, tells a story every day. It speaks to your guests, to your loved ones, to strangers, but most importantly, it speaks to the unseen forces that weave circumstances, opportunities, and connections into your life. The question you must ask yourself is, what story is my home telling? Is it one of vibrant life, open doors, and expanding possibilities? Or is it whispering tales of stagnation, decay, and hidden blockages? Every withered flower left too long on a table, every dusty, lifeless corner, every symbol of loss unknowingly displayed is a paragraph in that story. Likewise, every fresh bloom, every consciously placed symbol of hope, every small act of renewal writes a new chapter, one where prosperity feels welcomed, where joy feels inevitable, and where growth feels as natural as breathing. You are not powerless in this process. In fact, you are the author, the editor, and the artist of your energetic biography. The moment you become conscious of your environment's role in shaping your destiny, you reclaim extraordinary power. You begin to see that inviting wealth is not about grand gestures or extravagant expenditures. It is about daily choices, simple shifts, small acts of respect for the living energy that cradles your aspirations. Replacing a vase of wilting flowers with vibrant peonies is not merely redecorating. It is a statement of intent, a declaration that says, I am ready for flourishing, for abundance, for life in its fullest expression. Removing symbols of sorrow and separation from your living spaces is not denial. It is an act of healing, an act of clearing space so that better things may enter. Perhaps what is most beautiful about this process is how immediate and tangible the effects can be. When you shift the energy of your environment, you shift the energy of your inner world. You breathe easier, you dream bigger, you recognize opportunities that once slipped past unseen. Relationships warm, projects gain momentum, finances stabilize and grow. Even on the most difficult days, your home becomes a sanctuary of possibility, a place where your spirit can recharge and your faith in life's goodness can be renewed. This is the silent, profound magic of Feng Shui done well. It becomes a quiet but relentless ally in your journey toward a life that feels truly abundant. Today you have uncovered the subtle yet immense influence that something as simple as flowers can exert on your fortune and well-being. You have learned which blooms nourish prosperity and which, however beautiful, can sow unseen obstacles. You now understand that every object in your home is either your ally or your adversary in the energetic cultivation of success. And you stand at a powerful crossroads, armed with knowledge and choice. So I gently ask you, which flower are you most excited to bring or perhaps remove from your home today? Is it the lush, wealth-drawing peony, the sun-chasing, opportunity-attracting sunflower? Or is it the quiet decision to part ways with a symbol of endings, a decision that silently clears the way for new blessings to take root? I invite you to share your thoughts, reflections, and intentions in the comments below. Your story, your decision, might be the spark that inspires someone else to reimagine the energy of their life. And if today's insights opened even a small window of new understanding for you, if you felt a subtle inner shift, a recognition that you have more power than you realized, I warmly, sincerely invite you to like, share, and subscribe to New Day Mindfulness. Your support is not just encouragement for this channel, it is a vital part of weaving a larger web of consciousness, where ancient wisdom and practical action meet to transform modern lives quietly but profoundly. Together we are building homes, workplaces, and communities that no longer passively absorb whatever energy happens to flow in, but instead consciously shape environments that magnetize prosperity, joy, and unstoppable growth. Every small choice matters. Every adjustment sends ripples outward. And as you align your environment with the life you dream of, you will find that life rushing to meet you halfway, again and again, until the story your home tells is no longer one of wishing and waiting, but of arrival and fulfillment. Wealth, after all, is not a mystery. It is not a distant prize reserved for the lucky few. It is the natural result of living in energetic integrity with the principles that govern flow, balance, and expansion. Choose to become the silent architect of your fortune. Begin with a flower. Begin today.